Hello my lovelies, my name is Stephanie and welcome back to my channel. And before we get started on today's topic, there is something that I would like to address. So I put out a video last week on Monday talking about how I personally don't choose to identify my sex as female. And in that video, I said, I identify as a woman, but I identify as a trans woman, and I choose to identify myself as a trans woman. I take a huge amount of pride in being a trans woman. And so it's just, I just wanted to make a video that was like, I'm not trying to be female, I'm just trying to exist. I'm just trying to live my life as a proud trans woman. And in turn, you responded with this. So although all of the comments aren't negative, I find it really interesting that so many people seem to have missed the point of that video entirely, or have jumped straight to being like really offended by the video. So the thing that was kind of really bothering me is that people weren't understanding my meaning, were assuming that I as a trans person was stupid, or were assuming that I as a human was transphobic, which is entirely wrong. And I think my favourite one of all of them is that some of you thought that you were entitled enough to have me only voice an opinion with which you agree with, which is not the case. And I think that what was really funny was people were angry that I was expressing an opinion that they weren't necessarily comfortable with, and then proceeded to lecture and accuse me in my comment section of being transphobic, of having internalized transphobia, and then having the absolute nerve to be surprised when I deleted their comments from my comment section. It was, so anyway, I'm gonna do a video in the future about how content creators don't owe you anything. And one of the things they primarily do not owe you is an opinion with which you agree with. So in summary, the point of last week's video was to say that I personally, Stephanie Lynette, me as an individual human, I personally do not identify my sex as being female. That was the whole point of the video. And I'm really sorry that you got upset about that and got upset about the fact that I was talking about that. But I personally, me, do not identify as having a female sex. Just me, okay? And that's not to say that this doesn't make me, it doesn't make me any less of a woman. Not by a long stretch of the imagination. It doesn't make me any less of a woman. I'm a proud trans woman. Whenever I have to list my sex, I self-describe and I say trans woman, and if self-describe isn't an option, I say prefer not to say, and then I mention it in the rest of like my application or whatever I'm doing or any of those things. My personal opinion and my choice to a personal sexual identity as an individual human does not in any way impact your choice to identify as your sex as being female, your choice to identify as identifying with the sex that you have transitioned to, and it doesn't invalidate the trans experience, it doesn't invalidate any other trans women. I personally don't identify as having a female sex, and that's it. That's all there is to say about it. And I'm really sorry that some people seem to not get that video, and you know, to each their own. We love the people who choose to get offended, go for it. But the summary is, I personally don't choose, okay? Don't choose to identify my sex as being female. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that I identify as being male. You know, I have XY chromosomes, but chromosomes aren't indicative of the sex that you're assigned. You can have additional ones, you can, you know, and I'm gonna do a whole video talking about that next week. But my choice to choose to not identify my sex as being female doesn't affect any other trans people. Just because I have a personal platform where I share my views doesn't mean I'm right. They're just my views. It's my choice to identify however I want to identify. And it really upset me to see so many people trying to police my identity in my comment section. So just to reiterate one last time, the point of last week's video was to say that I don't personally identify as having a female sex. I don't identify as having a male sex. I don't identify as non-binary. When I have to list my sex in my life, on my forms, on my channel, I choose to identify as a trans woman. I choose to identify as a trans woman because although I used to identify as being transgender, I now lean more towards transsexual because while I haven't changed my sex, I have changed my sex characteristics. And so that's all I'm gonna say on that. But the thing that really bothered me is someone decided to say that because I use the MTF label, which stands for male to female when you're transitioning, that I was somehow wrong or that I was being sketchy. And the reason that I choose to use MTF when describing my transition, and the reason I have a female sex marker on my passport, is because it makes my life easier. We live in a world that doesn't accept trans people, so anything I can do to make my experience more straightforward and to give myself the least amount of dysphoria is the most helpful. I am a male to female transsexual woman. I haven't changed my sex, I have changed my sex characteristics. I haven't changed my internal makeup, but I have had hormones, and I choose to identify as female on my passport because it gives me less dysphoria than identifying as male. When they come out with a non-binary gender marker, I will most likely put that on my passport. But this is the thing that really bothers me, is that people seem to have this misconception that labels aren't naturally contradictory. Labels are incredibly contradictory by nature. Okay, I was born male and identify as a woman. I was not born female and I don't identify as being female. That was not the sex that was assigned to me. However, as I've transitioned, as I've become a transsexual woman, as I've changed my sex characteristics and had hormones and had invasive surgery and had voice therapy, I no longer associate with having a sex with male because I put so much effort in to change my sex. But the thing is, it's on a spectrum. Okay, so you've got male over here and female over here. You've got this whole journey in between, and these might be the binaries. And within this whole journey, you've got non-binary and you've got intersex and you have got a variation of different things. And that is where I place myself in my gender identity marker. And although I might be closer to female than I am to male, it does not mean that I identify as fully female because I don't necessarily understand the full biological female experience. And I'm really sorry if that bothers you, but it's my identity. It took me a long time to come to terms with it, and that is how I feel about it, okay? And just to kind of end this mini rant at the beginning of the video, I'm a trans woman on the internet. I post free content in a bubbly way in the hopes that it will promote queer joy. Maybe it will help some people to not feel so alone or help them along on their journey. And because I want to encourage the sharing of trans stories and voices in a positive way. And that's why I'm on the internet. This is like my therapy. I love sharing my stories. I love sharing my opinions on how I see the world through my transition, how I identify with my sex characteristics, how my transition has shaped me as a person, how it could potentially help other people, how voicing my opinion, having one more trans woman in the internet is a really, really positive thing. But if you don't like my content, don't watch it. Don't debate it, because you're inviting negativity in. Because the thing is, I'm in control of the narrative that I set on my channel. I can police my comment section if I want to. I can delete your comment if I want to. And if you're commenting on my video saying something along the lines of, oh, Stephanie, watching this video made me really upset, I'm gonna unsubscribe from you, I don't care. Because the thing is, if you're gonna comment something negative on something on the internet, something that I put out there as a trans woman, making myself vulnerable to promote trans voices, to promote trans stories, to talk about my journey and my identity, if you're going to post something negative about that, don't be surprised when it invites negative responses from my other subscribers or from myself, or defensive responses from myself or from my subscribers. And don't come back to my channel and act shocked that your negative comment has been deleted, because the thing is, on my channel I like to promote queer joy, and if you're not doing that in my comment section and I have the opportunity to delete you and I catch it in time, then I'm gonna delete it, okay? And that's just how it is. It's my right as a content creator to be able to police the message that I put out there and the space that I create for myself and any of my subscribers. So I'm not saying all of this to defend myself, because I don't think it's wrong, but I just wanted to explain that I'm really sorry that some people seem to have completely missed the point of that video. Completely missed the point of the video. But I create videos on the internet. I'm not curing cancer. I'm not doing, like, you know, charity work on here. I'm just voicing my opinion of my transition and my journey. And if you don't like it, then don't stay. So yeah, don't police my voice on my platform. Don't police what I have to say. Don't police my comment section, because that's my job. And don't be surprised if your negativity invites in other negativity and then I delete it to make everyone's day a little bit better. Okay? Okay, so now that that unpleasant list is over, hi, I'm Stephanie, or Steph. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. I'm really sorry if this is your first introduction to my channel and I'm very like, but I had some like really negative kind of comments on my last video accusing me of being like transphobic and internalizing transphobia and being uneducated and not understanding my own gender identity. So I do apologise for that in advance. Okay, so today's topic of video is going to be quite short, quite sweet, just a really quick breakdown, and it's going to be sex versus gender. Now, just a slight disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. I am not an endocrinologist. I am not a medical professional of any description. I am a trans woman living my life, and my experience of gender versus sex comes from that and is informed by that. If you don't like that, that's fine. There's plenty of videos on the internet that explore gender versus sex from medical professionals. But if you're looking for my opinion from a trans person in a snazzy, sparkly glitter vest, then this is the place for you. Okay, so I just wanted to start by some like very basic definitions of sex and gender. Don't shoot the messenger. This is what society goes off of. I'm really sorry if you don't like it. I know that there is a lot of nuance to sex versus gender, and I can't explore all of it in here. However, I do want to explore chromosomes further, because there was a lot of comments on my last video accusing me of being stupid for thinking that chromosomes were directly linked to sex, and there are several conditions in which that is not the case, so I will be doing a video on chromosomes next week. Okay, so first up is sex, and sex refers to someone's biological aspects. So these are usually determined by their chromosomes, by their hormones, and by their gestation and their interaction within the gestation period. So this is things like your genitals, whether or not you have XX or XY chromosomes, and there are many exceptions to that which we'll explore next week. But this isn't always the case though. There are many conditions and instances naturally occurring where your chromosomes, your hormones, your development during gestation doesn't necessarily correlate to your sex. And these are things like, so for example, intersex people are a really good example of this. They can have genitals or chromosomes or reproductive organs that either don't fit the binary in which they've been assigned, don't fit the binary in which their body exists, or they fit outside of any binary. So this can mean something from having genitals that don't necessarily match to your reproductive organs. This can mean something along the lines of having something like sewer syndrome. Sewer syndrome can be something where someone born with traditionally female genitalia, so a vagina, happen to have XY chromosomes, and this can occur many times over, and it happens naturally. It's not something that is done, you know, there's no necessarily links between them, and that can be something that means that your chromosomes don't necessarily match to your sex. But similarly, similarly, there are many conditions in which people develop additional chromosomes, and this can then play some havoc in between whether or not their gender identity, their sexual identity matches with their kind of body and their genitals and their presentation and things like that. And these conditions mean that humans, because we all have 46 chromosomes, well, we don't all have 46 chromosomes, but naturally occurring, the most common instance of chromosomes is having 46 chromosomes, but you can be born with 47 chromosomes. If you have Sewer syndrome, you can be born with predominantly XY chromosomes and things like that. So sex is your biological aspect, and now there are going to be people in the comments who quote things like bioessentialism, but these are the things. This is how it's identified within society currently. This is the medical language around it that exists. It's going to change, but there we go. So that's sex. Gender, on the other hand, is a social construct, and this is the amalgamation of a million different things. It can be environmental, it can be your behaviors, it can be how you're raised, it can be focus on masculinity, focus on femininity, it can be your attributes, how you physically present, it can be your personal view on your body. So your gender is personal and it's tailored to you. And while it is most common for most people to have a gender identity that matches with the sexual identity they were born at birth, transgender people, like myself, are people whose gender identity does not necessarily correlate with the sex that they were born at birth. So my gender identity is a woman. I identify as being a trans woman. However, when I was born, I was assigned the male gender marker because that was my born sex. And this is the thing, gender and sex, they're contradictory. People cross them in and out all the time, but this is the difference, okay? And this is the really important bit. Sex is your biological characteristics. Now, they don't always get this right, but you know, 7 out of 10 times, it's because if you're born with a vagina, you're going to be given the sex as being female, and while that is not necessarily appropriate, it's just how things are. So your sex is what you're assigned at birth, it's your biology, it can be your chromosomes, but not necessarily. It can be whether or not you have the right reproductive organs assigning with the traditional kind of genitalia and things like that. So that's your sex. And gender is an entire social construct. And this is the really interesting thing. So gender is entirely made up, and I know as humans we really struggle to deal with the idea of something that we live with in our everyday life being completely made up. Things like currency, pieces of paper that don't actually mean anything in the grand scheme of things, but because someone somewhere assigned them a meaning at some point, they're worth millions and millions and millions of pounds. So gender is a social construct that has formed over millions of years, that has come from the result of having traditionally, not always, but traditionally and primarily, two main binaries of sex, and that's where genders come from. And then you have something called gender performance. That's how you present yourself, that's how you perform your gender. So people with traditionally male genitalia when they're born will grow up in most instances to feel pressurized to perform masculinity, which is a type of gender performance which feeds into your gender. So your gender is entirely personal. It's built up of things like your behavioral characteristics, your family, your upbringing, but it is a personal choice for you. So although my body when I was born was male, it had traditional male genitals, and that's where I was when I was born, and that was the binary I was born into. My gender identity never aligned with that, and I do think of myself as having a more female-leaning brain, which is why that kind of led me down the route of having gender dysphoria and things like that. But that's the difference between gender and sex. It's really, really simple. Now, these aren't finite. These can change. As we have seen in the last 100 years, medicine has evolved and evolved and evolved. But where we are currently in society in 2023, this is where we sit. This is where we are. We're moving forwards with this as our idea and our understanding of sex versus gender. I really hope that you found this video useful. I really wanted to respond to all of those comments that seemed to think I was a stupid person that didn't know the difference between sex and gender. But the thing is, I might have a different sexual identity than people would assume that I have, but this is the fundamental difference between sex and gender. But like I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professional person, I'm not a scientist. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. It's just my opinion. I'm just a lady on the internet. But that, dear folks, is the difference between sex and gender. I hope you have a lovely day. I hope you're avoiding transphobia, unlike I was on my video last Monday. And I will see you very soon for another video. Bye.